Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator.
How are you this evening, sir?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. Weather is cool, no rain, everything is all right. So I'm ready to go.
I was hoping that you'll be having this broadcast from a yacht this evening. What happened, sir?
I sent it to you to be serviced. It
You
hasn't
sent
come
it to
back.
me to be serviced.
Yeah. Mhm, mhm.
All right, I'll make sure it's serviced properly and returned back.
I
Uh,
knew I knew you were going to come up. I knew you were going to come up with that. And we might as well deal with it now. Look, I have been traveling on presidential naval yachts since the time of Murtala Mohammed. It has been there. It is used when the president on Navy Day, when the president usually gets into a naval uniform, like an admiral of the fleet, and he takes the patrol of the ship, says the naval vessel sailed past him, and he returns the compliment, and then he returns the yacht to the navy. Now it's come out now that this navy ship, this yacht, it has come out that it was ordered. I won't even say, I'm not going to play politics with this. It was ordered by the Navy under President Buhari. Ordered by the Navy under President Buhari. It had arrived because there was no Navy Day after this ship arrived. He didn't use it. It's partially paid for. And now they needed a line in the budget where the rest of the yacht will be paid for, spare parts will be paid for, and of course, the people who built this ship for you will send training partners who will come and train your naval ratings. After the president had used the ship during the naval parade, he goes back into the Navy. In any case, it's never left the Navy. It goes back to them for operational duties. Now, don't ask me what those operational duties are. All over the world, military operational duties are not revealed on the pages of the newspaper, on the pages of social media. The only country I know in the world that then starts to demand where the Google seller, the Marwa Keke seller gets involved is in Nigeria. And we should be careful. We should be careful. Two things went wrong with this issue. Number one, the use of the title. The use of the title. If I wanted to make an issue of this, I will go back because, as I said, the first time I used it was under Murtala Mohammed, and I'm talking about 1970, 76. I would have gone back and see what they called it at that time. What was the line in the budget called? I would have gone back to check, and what has it been called every time that they had had. I mean, of course, they don't change the vessel every year. They have their own requirements, they don't know of when it has to be changed. And so that's led to the Chief of Naval Operations or Logistics. Why this was ordered by the Navy under Buhari. It had arrived. They have started, the usual, you get an equipment and you are testing to make sure that everything is all right, it's been partially paid for. Why was the country not told at that time? Because there was no one to leak it in order to embarrass the administration. Nobody to leak it to embarrass the administration. So the name given to this and the fact that attention was drawn to it was meant to embarrass the administration that didn't order it and that didn't pay fully for it. It was meant to. So, public servants need to be careful about their loyalty. They need to be careful about their loyalty. I'm saying this with all seriousness. There is no room except at election time. There is no room for partisan loyalty or disloyalty among public servants in the conduct of their duties. There is no room. Or else, you are then going to start getting, well, what the Americans do. A new administration comes in, and it comes in with its own men, top rank, and although the public servants inherited are still there, but it comes in with its own top rank men who can spot such acts of disloyalty to say, no, this is not what they normally call this. This is meant to embarrass the president. They normally call it this, and that is what we will call it. I won't say anything more than that.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't actually expecting that response there, but thank you very much, sir. Let me start from Europe this time around, sir. And I'll start with a slightly different piece of news about Ukraine. I know the war has been going on and no one knows when that's going to end. But then Ukraine is in the news for a very different set of reasons. And that is the fact that the EU has given the signal that negotiations will begin next year for Ukraine and Moldova to now be part of the EU. It's been hailed a historic day by President Zelensky. How do you react to that piece of information, and how do you think that's going to impact the ongoing war? Is it more provocative?
No. Provocation is not the word I will use. I doubt whether there is anything that could be regarded as provocative in the war between Russia and Ukraine. It's really gone beyond that. The reason we are not hearing so much about how many people have been killed, what monuments of great emotional stature have been demolished is because the Hamas-Israeli war has simply driven the Ukraine-Russian war off the pages of the newspaper and off the screen of of the media. It is still going on full blast. Ukraine is still at the receiving end of, murderous attacks by Russia, and any helping hand, whether in terms of logistics, whether in terms of moral boost, psychological boost, anything will be welcome. But you mentioned Moldova. That has been hanging in there for quite a while in terms of the application to join EU. There is also Georgia, also who they've now said they will put on. I forgot. They have this stance of fast track its membership, so to be considered. But the most important one actually is Turkey. Turkey has been trying to join the EU for donkey years, and she'd been rejected on the basis of human rights, that its human rights profile did not meet the bar set by the EU itself. And so the question that Turkey is raising is the Moldova and Ukraine have their judicial structure met the bar set by the EU, or is this discrimination? And this is the problem this will pose for the EU. And I'm sure they knew it was going to come up. But I think that having been blocked from membership of NATO by the constitutive acts of NATO and by the insistence of the United States, that during the war, and nations involved in war could not join NATO for fear that Article 5 will be activated, and United States just doesn't want to get into an active war at this time. The Europeans might have felt that they needed to show a more concrete helping hand to Ukraine, and I would suggest that we should pay attention to steps that are, those little steps that are being taken, in Europe. Europe had just held, again under Macron, a conference on humanitarian forces over the war going on in the Middle East, without the participation of the United States. And you'll notice that that there are gaps that are now developing between the position of the United States and the position of Europe, even over the Middle East. On votes taken in the Security Council, there have been discernible distinctions between the positions of the Europe and the United States. So that talks will now come up early next year over admission of talk of Ukraine into the EU. I would say widens the gap between the foreign policy positions or the foreign policy profile of Europe and the foreign policy profile of the United States.
While we're on Ukraine, let me go to the news that the White House delivered to Ukraine, in a sense, that at the start of the war, they had earmarked about $60 billion to Ukraine. And as of now, 96% of that has now been depleted. Two questions I have for you there, sir. The first one being, what does that now mean to Ukraine? And secondly, the fact that when the war with Israel between Israel and Hamas started, the news the US was putting out at the time was, hey, we can handle two wars at the same time. Now that they're starting to talk about depleted funds for Ukraine, is that sending a signal that maybe they cannot handle these wars on multiple fronts at the same time?
The second question first. No, it doesn't mean that. The problem the United States has is because of the dysfunctionality between Congress and the White House, especially between a Republican-controlled House of Representatives, where there is a bloc that doesn't want to spend more money on Ukraine. It's not the majority, but because of the way politics is played in the United States, a minority bloc in the Republican Party can block legislation, especially financial legislation, going on to the floor to be voted. They can block it, and they are blocking it. So really, what is being depleted is the funds voted already. America is not about to run out of funds for Ukraine. And I don't think they will run out of funds. I'm sure, and this goes back to some of the comments I made about the yacht. There will be legislation, security legislation, that allows the United States to pick on funds from the CIA, from the National Security Agency, from here, from funds hidden in agencies. And the agencies know that those funds are there to be used for matters declared by the president for emergency security. The Congress itself knows that those funds are there. The only people who don't know about those funds are the American people. And if this were Nigeria, it will be shouted on the rooftop of Jerusalem and Ashkelon. Oh, funds are hidden here, funds are hidden there. And this will be information leaked by public servants who, because they have problems of loyalty with, with the administration that is there, will leak it, and then it will become a big noise. This will not happen in the United States when it becomes a matter of national security. It will not happen in the United States. So that, but it's a signal, not actually to Ukraine, it's a signal to Congress to up its act so that the United States does not, because, and the Republicans need to be careful, because if there are then issues, at election time, they could be accused of aiding and abetting the Russians by, blocking funds that should normally go to Ukraine. But I don't think America can fight two wars. I mean, of course, depending on the war. If you are talking about war against China, of course it cannot fight, that war. And it also depends on your definition of war. The United States is still not hands and feet involved. It's still fighting the Ukrainian war through the back door. So it's not fully in there. So you can't come to a conclusion that maybe it cannot fight two wars on our front.
The first question, sir, was now that this is happening, what should Ukraine be taking out of the message from the White House? And how is that likely to affect the impact of the current war that's going on there? And does it signal something to Russia as well?
Russia will be happy about the news, of course. I mean, if your protagonist is about to run short of, it's not the money, it's what the money buys. So if your protagonist is about to run short of logistics, that's good news for the other side. It's bad news for Ukraine in terms of morale. Even though I have tended to downplay the impact of the news out of the White House, it is still news that is unwelcome by Ukraine and unwelcome by Europe, because it means also that Europe will have to up its own military contribution to Ukraine. And I think whether they have the capability or not, I don't know. But the Europeans are committed to a Ukrainian victory, simply because, number one, it's on their territory. I mean, what I mean is, it's on the continent of Europe. Victory for Russia will encourage Russia to, there are all these countries, Moldavia, Georgia, Lithuania, there are all these, that were part of the Soviet Union before, but that had got its independence. And they are not going to be sleeping easy tonight as to the consequences of the United States announcement, because it will encourage Russia to seek to increase its influence, in those areas that used to be part of the Soviet Union.
Before I leave the US side, again, there was an announcement earlier on in the week that the US had started, or at least had attacked for a second time, locations in Syria where Iran may have been keeping some of their arms and ammunition with which they were supporting some of the groups that were there. And what do you think of that escalation, sir? What's your view there? Because it seems like even further escalation, drawing the United States even more into the war that's happening on that end.
Quite an apt question, because even today, there is news that an American drone was shot down. I believe it was in Iraq. So this little things should not be ignored, because it has the capacity of pulling the United States further into a conflict where it is already deeply involved. Fighting through the back door, supporting one party, and it has moved logistics hardware into that area, and the United States, on behalf of Israel, has to keep an eye on Lebanon, on Syria, on Iraq, and on Iran. And while it's only Lebanon through Hezbollah that has been involved in an exchange of rockets and missiles with Israel, other parties could indirectly attack the United States. As I said, indirectly, the United States will not really be the target. They will be sending signals to Hamas. We're on your side. You are not alone. The fact that we are not firing arrows at Israel does not mean that, we've left you alone. Look at what we are engaged in with the United States. What this means is the need, honestly, to be serious about the Middle East. I'm not sure, I don't know your question, so I don't know whether you are going to ask me any question on Hamas Israeli war. But if you are not going to ask me, then I will say, I'll seize this opportunity to say the world has to concentrate on that war, a way to de-escalate that war. How can a cabinet minister openly threatening that they can drop atomic weapons on Gaza. How? In a sane world, how could it? I mean, what is the mentality of that cabinet minister that will be talking about the use of nuclear weapons? Of course, the whole world knows that Israel has about 90 nuclear warheads. One knows that. But that this has now been brought into the equation actually means when this war is over and people turn their attention other places, countries, Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, like Egypt, if it does not already have it, Qatar, because they have the resources, will now be saying to themselves, well, we can be subject in case we have, difficulties with Israel. We can be subject to blackmail of a nuclear nature.
I was going to ask a few questions, but slightly different perspective, because earlier on today, there was the news that Israel was going to allow 4 hours of relative silence in the course of their bombings of Gaza. And I thought that was a positive sign towards de-escalation. But then we're only talking about 4 hours in the course of the day, and Israel is still fighting deep in the tunnels and things like that. So I thought that was positive news, but I'd like to hear what your view is about that piece of news on Israel now agreeing to 4 hours, and that Israel is actually, I think the head of Mossad and some other groups are in Qatar negotiating on the release of the hostages.
You will recall last week, I said I thought the Arab countries and their supporters missed a great opportunity to have made progress, a comforting progress on this war by not persuading Russia not to veto the American resolution, which called for one, humanitarian pauses, and two, no forcible movement of population. Though to me, those are the two key aspects. Now, it didn't give the Arab nations what they wanted, which is a ceasefire, because pauses can be broken at any time. But it was a wedge in the door. And for you to resume bombing or to resume military action after a humanitarian pause, you have to exert more energy than what is going on now, just bombing. Last week, I said I thought the Arabs missed a turning on the road there. That we will not be talking about a 3-hour or 4-hour pause, humanitarian pause. In exchange, by the way, It's not free lunch in exchange for hostages being released. I think that we are hearing about 15 hostages, maybe 20 hostages. I have always had a problem. And you may say, Prof, you are going to contradict yourself here. And you may be right. I've always held the view that the international humanitarian law that allows you to feed your enemies and then bomb them after feeding them does not make sense to me. It does not. We had that conundrum during our civil war, and it has turned up at every civil war in the world. Incidentally, we are witnessing it in Sudan because I can't justify feeding an opponent and then bombing them at lunchtime. You feed them at you feed them at breakfast time, and then you bomb them at lunchtime. Or in this case, okay, you bomb them 4 days later. What progress have you made? Incidentally, you must face that difficult question of a permanent ceasefire and a conference that addresses the root cause of the problem. So I'm not asking for a ceasefire en blanc. No. A ceasefire doesn't really solve anything. But I am happy that part of what is now becoming part of the language of engagement of the United States in the Middle East is the parameters are one, that there will be no permanent engagement of Israel in the Gaza. It will not stay there forever. Two, that the civilian population of Gaza will not be forcibly moved out of Gaza. Number three, that there's not going to be a forcible movement of population on the West Bank. All these kind of things that Israel must have been whispering to the Americans are in their minds to do. And I think those are the parameters of a conference, a peace conference, the day after the guns stop booming. Now, we are going to be dragged into this war. And again, we are not talking about it, which is usual of us. A Saudi African summit is about to start in Riyadh, followed by an Arab African summit. Let me make one thing clear. I have always been opposed to this African Timbuktu summit. African River Niger Summit. So now let me sketch out to you what we are going to have. Saudi Arabia African Summit, Arab African Summit, Japanese African Summit, Turkey African Summit, the American African Summit, no, French African Summit. You know, it's like, you know, summoning of, you see, there is an implication of subordination there. You those who have the money and the capability, summoning those who don't, masters summoning servants. That's the way I interpret this. And I've been waging a war against it. I've been campaigning against it. But in this particular case, now we are going to be dragged during a war in that area into summits. So there will be probably 3 summits that at least are on the cards. Saudi African Summit, Arab African Summit, and Turkey African Summit. Supposing Israel were to ask for Israel African Summit, what will we do? And what kind of resolutions are we expecting from this summit? Are we expecting resolutions that will be condemnatory of Hamas? Are we? Or are we going to get resolutions that will be asking African countries, even if it's only verbal, to show some sympathy towards the Palestinians, but that will be couched as Arabs. So now we are being dragged into it. What is the African position on this matter? I know that the African Union had issued a statement calling for peace, calling for ceasefire, yes. And Nigeria herself has called for ceasefire, has called for peace, has called for two-state solution. But then there are African countries that have broken diplomatic relations with Israel. South Africa has done so. So in a way, we are not going into any of these conferences with a solid position that is arrived at through consensus. We are not. So there you are. Now, I can't even remember the question you asked me before I flew off, you know, in a tangent. If I haven't answered your question, please, you know, remind me.
No, that's all right, sir.
Remind our colleagues they are welcome to join in this conversation. I don't like them when they are quiet, you know. I don't.
All right. Well, to everyone, please do raise your hands if you want to contribute to the conversation that's going on. But sorry, you touch on the Saudi Africa Summit. An interesting point there. Earlier on today, the Saudi finance minister said they were setting aside about $500 million for African countries. Now, in the context of Africa and the kind of investment we need, $500 million is not a lot, but at the same time, it's a lot of money to have $500 million to distribute. And they're talking about, they are working with partners to support Ghana and other countries regarding their debt. That's what Saudi is talking about. I think that is significant, sir. If going to this summit means that the debt profile of Africa becomes a better profile compared to what it is now. What is your take on that sort of carrot, I would say, that the Saudi government is putting forward towards African countries?
I'm glad that you are not raising this issue with enthusiasm. I myself can feel some reluctance on your part because the whole of Africa is that what we are worth now, $500 million. Is that it? That what we are worth? Well, again, don't let me raise the issue of slavery, because I mean that's how you negotiate, how much you buy slaves in those days, and to think that they will now sweeten it by bailing out Ghana. In exchange for what, by the way? In exchange for what? Ghana should not have gotten itself into a position where it went financially bankrupt due to recklessness of fiscal policies. But again, that you know it yourself. There's no free lunch. These things that they are now throwing in our faces on the eve of the conference. Don't they spend more on soccer, on football? I mean, how much have they spent on sports diplomacy, golf, football, and all the other extra things that the sports Commonwealth Fund of Saudi Arabia has spent? Haven't they spent more than that? There are times, anyway, we put ourselves in an insulting position. Let me put it that way. Because if we have run responsible governments in Africa since 1960, oh, good, I can see one hand up. I hope, Mr. Moderator, you can see it as well.
I can see that, Ambassador Lewu. Yes, sir. I can see that.
And I can keep quiet. But if we had shown responsibility in terms of the way we've managed our country, that one country will be throwing $500 million at us, will be insulting, and it is still insulting.
Ambassador Lewu.
Hello?
We can hear you, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening,
sir. I would like to comment on the issue of the resolution by the United States, which was vetoed by Russia, which the Honorable Minister was saying that the Arabs missed the turning on the road for not putting pressure on Russia to avoid using the veto. I don't fully agree with his assertion. Why? Because Israel feels they are the chosen one of God. They can do and undo. They have never abided with any resolution of the Security Council. They do whatever they like just because America and Britain and Europe are supporting them. Whatever they do, they get away with it. And that's why the pogrom that is happening now in Gaza will continue. Very unfortunate. The Arabs, I believe, I may be wrong, felt that stopping the Russians from vetoing the US resolution, draft resolution, will not, there will be no impact because either they put pressure or they don't put pressure. Israel will do whatever they want to do and get away with it. As for the way by which Africans are called by many rich countries of the world, that they are packed in buses like sardine to go and bow down just because of a few dollars they are going to give them, compared to what they can do in their own countries to improve their own economy without depending on this type of jamboree they are called upon every year, every time, by either, like the Honorable Minister said, either by Japan, by Britain, by France, now by Saudi Arabia. And incidentally, I am not very sure whether the Nigerian delegation currently in Riyadh is aware of the implication of their presence there, which the Honorable Minister pointed out. That is, we are going slowly, directly or indirectly, going to be drawn into supporting the Arab cause, the what do you call it, the Saudi Arabian cause, because there are two summits now. Saudi Arabia on one hand, the Arabs on the other. The Arabs, many of them who are within the African continent, are Africans whenever they needed the support of the AU or other African countries. When they don't need us, they are 100% Arabs. This is another way by which they now want to use us. What is $500 billion or trillion, whatever they call it? What is it? Like the, the minister said, some footballers in Saudi Arabia get more than that. They are paid more than that at the end of it all. So they are using that money like a bait to draw us in and then do the quiet diplomacy of whispering in our ears that we should support them. We should please ask our delegation to be very careful and should not commit Nigeria or allow other African countries to commit the whole of Africa into this trap. It's a big trap, a big trap. We should avoid this.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. One area that I want to raise in the last few minutes that we've got, it's this issue of quite a lot of groups are calling for a two-state solution.
I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator, there is another and
yes, Ambassador Igali, please unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you. I don't mean to interfere.
Honorable Minister, thank you very much. And our able interlocutor. I would like to touch on several things. Let me start from the very beginning on the question of presidential yacht. And although it was not part of your main conversation, but you started on that note, I think it is the height of fiscal indiscipline and rascality for us to go that route. No doubt the Americans have always had presidential yacht, but if you remember, during the time of President Jimmy Carter, he sold it because he said it was not necessary. There was need for more fiscal discipline. Even in Britain, the Britannia, Royal Britannia,
Oh dear, I think we lost Ambassador a bit there. Can you still hear us, sir? Prof, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Good. And I know he.
Okay, he's back. He's back.
Oh, good, good.
Ambassador Igali, we've lost you, sir. Oh, he just dropped off. I think he's having connection problems.
Oh dear. I know. I know he was taking issues with my position on the presidential yacht, and it's a pity he dropped off because it would have been good.
He's back, sir.
He's back. Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm still here. I've come back.
Yes, sir. Go ahead,
I'm
sir.
sorry, I have a miserable bandwidth tonight. So I'll make it quick, and that's to say that we can show a little bit more of discipline. It's how many countries have presidential yachts for fleet inspection once a year, or yes, operational things we don't want to get dabble into them, but the idea of riding on keeping it and riding on it when chief of naval staff or any of the naval senior people want to go offshore to inspect the fleet does not warrant spending so much money to maintain a yacht. And it is not the currency again around the world. A lot of these warships we have executive cabins for the top naval hierarchy. Well, I thought I should just say that it came up during the time of President Jonathan. And I remember that President Jonathan rejected it, that he did not need a yacht, and it was taken away from the budget. So how the Navy brought it again, and while we were borrowing money to buy these things, could get President Buhari to have put it in the budget was quite, and much of it, they've not even finished paying for it. That's why we're now seeing it reflected in the budget again for 2024. Well, having said that, coming to the issues of foreign policy proper, Honorable Minister, first, I think that in for countries like Nigeria, in our diplomacy and the intermediary role, if not actually weighty enough, but in terms of when we articulate our positions on what is happening in the Middle East, I think that we also have to encourage the Arab side, various groups, to try not to provoke Israel. We know that the Americans are rapidly behind Israel. They are biased. Whatever it's an enfant terrible. Nobody can do anything to Israel. But at the same time, when groups in Syria begin to attack or try to use drones to attack American forces, they know that America will come up with the full weight of their firepower on them. But they keep doing these things. And I think that the international opinion, public opinion, should also be to for this insist that these groups should de-escalate their activism in the region, not to provoke the full power of America and their protege Israel, because America is now claiming that they acted because there were drone attacks on their troops or attempted attacks on their troops by groups in Syria that were sympathetic to or being sponsored by Iran. Or, so I think that we have to keep also in our conversations with the Arab world, insist on addressing this question of radical groups that are fomenting trouble in that region, and to some extent also escalating this to the rest of the world. But the last thing I'd like to say is what Ambassador Level spoke about, and what Honorable Minister also mentioned, of our participation in some of these international fora. I have a different view. It may be playing the devil's advocate, but I think that some of these countries realize that Africa is a continent to watch in terms of the potentials which the continent has in the future. And nobody wants to be left out as it were in the race towards Africa. So, yes, the Chinese, the Japanese, the European Union, the Americans all have this fora with Africa. Now, even the Saudis have come up with theirs, and we went with the Indians. Actually, I was on President Buhari's delegation to India with him in 2015 on the second African Indian Summit. Um, I think that they are seeing that this continent, there's a lot of potential. There's so much they know about Africa that because of our technological situation, we do not know. I remember once I had a Russian professor who came to talk to us about groundwater, and we were shocked by some of the things he told us in terms of the amount of groundwater resources we have, and which no other continent has the biggest groundwater, the biggest aquifers, and on the African continent. And it showed us on satellite, and it showed us certain data that are from the Russian intelligence. So these countries or these various groups know that Africa is a continent to watch. So let us try to pull them to our side. Let's not keep out, particularly when they see other countries which are they consider as their rivals doing the same thing. Tomorrow the Turkish will call us, and so on. So let's not feel too um, maybe feel that we are being treated with levity, or we are being treated with disrespect. We should take it in good stride, because it is a stage of development that we are. If the Saudis are going to give
Yeah, I think we lost Ambassador again there. So do you want to respond to those two comments from both ambassadors, sir?
No, I'm happy about
Okay, sir.
I'm happy
give us,
about I'm happy about the comments.
Okay,
They usually say that there are two sides to a coin. These days, I've learned that there are actually three sides to a coin. So it's always educative, to hear,
okay,
even when there are disagreements. But I'm glad that Ambassador Igali raised this issue of underground water, because just today, a retired chief of army staff sent me a video on water under the what do you call this desert in South Africa?
Kalahari.
Kalahari.
Desert.
Thank you. It's Kalahari Desert. I mean, I was amazed. And they don't even know how deep it is. And it reminded me of Gaddafi, my hero, or one of my heroes, who actually drilled into the Sahara Desert, pumped up pure water, and laid a pipe onto the coastal cities, Benghazi, and so on, and was, feeding them with fresh water from the Sahara. The second leg of his development was that he was then going to flood the Sahara Desert with pure water so that there could be an agricultural revolution, in the Sahara Desert. That was before he got killed. So I'm glad that Ambassador Egali raised it, and I do hope that perhaps our own government, because we've been crying that, from the Sahel, the Sahara Desert has been creeping, into Nigeria. Maybe we can do a bit of drilling ourselves and do what Gaddafi did. So that's a good issue.
Absolutely, sir. I think, incidentally, just this week, my son is in Namibia at the Gobabe Research Institute, and it was just amazing to see the kind of research that was going on at that part of the world. And a lot of universities from the UK actually send people down there to carry out research. And I think the narrative that Africa is rising is clear for all to see. The challenge that I see here is how we then manage what we have and make sure that we don't sell that off like it got taken away from us in the past. How do we make sure we now don't sell it off when they're not putting guns to our heads and killing us off and dragging us onto ships? I can see Ambassador Egali has his hand raised again. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I think I just want to throw up a piece of information. This morning, I ran into a gentleman that I'm sure the Honorable Minister and Ambassador Lew and a few others will remember, called Lawrence Agubuzo, who at the time was acting Secretary General of OAU, a career ambassador, now a traditional ruler. We met at the airport, and he mentioned something very interesting to me. Actually, was the acting Secretary General of OAU at the time it transmitted to become the African Union. And he said what happened yesterday re-echoed some of what Gaddafi did at the point of the transition. If we recall, Gaddafi had convoked a meeting of all Africa's first-class traditional rulers. And in Nigeria, President Obasanjo banned the Oni of Ife, Emir of Kano, and co from not going. But Gaddafi had sent aircrafts to many African countries, chartered planes, and took Ashantiene and all the traditional rulers, about 200 of them from all over Africa, because he wanted to set up a Council of African Traditional Rulers. Well, a lot of things happened, and what all that happened with Gaddafi and the events of settled that the kind of continental government he wanted to form and what failed because of the frustration from Thabo Mbeki, Obasanjo, and Abdoulaye Wade are now history. But what happened yesterday, according to Ambassador Agubuzo, was that a delegation of Libyan traditional rulers, about 20 of them, approached the Nigerian Council of Traditional Rulers to have a session of dialogue. And all what they came to say was a need for them to come back and reopen what Gaddafi actually wanted to do at the time, and was frustrated because Africa did not understand him, and it was a time for a high-level diplomatic engagement between traditional rulers of the continent. And all of them, the Oni of Ife, the Sultan of Sokoto, and about 30 Nigerian traditional rulers engaged with them and agreed that this should be widened to include other traditional rulers for them to be in a council. And what the Libyans want is to be meeting perhaps annually, to have some kind of meeting, semi-formal, of all African traditional rulers. I thought I should mention it because when Gaddafi came up with this idea of African Union, this issue of a diplomatic engagement of traditional rulers among themselves was one of the cardinal issues, but we read a lot of meaning to it and shut it down. So Nigerian contingent were maybe some second, third class traditional rulers who were given a few dollars through private people. So nobody of weight went. And when Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya did not send notable traditional rulers, it failed. But Gaddafi, the traditional rulers from Libya, even at this time of crisis, are going around all of Africa to call up their colleagues. Well, Excellency, I thought I should just mention it because it's something that is brewing.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Igali. I can see that Professor Akinteriwa has his hands raised. But Professor Akinyemi, before I bring on Professor Akinteriwa, is it worth us delving a little bit into what Ambassador Igali just raised next week, where we look at the role of traditional rulers in advancing the foreign policy of Nigeria? Let's focus on Nigeria, but Africa on a wider scale. What are the benefits, the pros and cons, having a group like this come together, and how will that help to drive forward a diplomacy for Nigeria? So maybe we start with that next week. Professor Akinteriwa, over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I think Ambassador Igali raised a critical point. But to the extent that Gaddafi is being presented as being frustrated, well, that is where I want to take my distance. I wouldn't say there was any frustration. Literature has shown that at that particular time, Muammar Gaddafi proposed in his United States of Africa that he will be the president of Africa. He gave the position of defense minister to Nigeria, industry, commerce to South Africa. He distributed all the positions. And it is at this level now that Nigeria in particular now saw with Senegal and either the B5 of the African Union, that this agenda of Muammar Gaddafi should not be allowed. So no one is disputing the fact that there may be goodness in it, and I'm happy that my brother, the moderator, has said that probably next week we should begin with the discussion of the likely role that can our traditional rulers can play in the development of Africa, especially from the perspective of continental integration. So you see, the agenda of Muammar Gaddafi was perceived as, a threat to national sovereignty, even though we are still talking about removal, or we are talking about a borderless African country. So this is what was responsible. I wouldn't say that there was any country in Africa or abroad or elsewhere that was actually frustrating Muammar Gaddafi. There's no disputing the fact that our president, Professor Akinyemi himself, had drawn attention to this water in the Kalahari, in the Sahara, and all those things. That was quite good project. But he was doing that one from the nationalist perspective at the level of Libya for the survival of his own people. But probably next Thursday, by the grace of God, we'll have the opportunity to expatiate on that. And I will thank Ambassador Igali for raising this critical foreign policy issue. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. I can see Ambassador Leu. I don't know if that was from before, if you've raised your hand again, but go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. I was just trying to react to the perspective of Ambassador Igali on the issue of Africa going on jamboree to various countries that call them to come to the table, to come and expatiate on their policies and what those countries feel they know about Africa. I believe that we've had series of these meetings, and it is not very convenient for African leaders, especially Nigeria, to be going on annual basis to all these various summits. As far as I'm concerned, these summits, they come back, we don't even see the report of what they have, what they call the take home. What we get from all those visits, we don't we don't see the impact. And we do have what we call joint commissions. Our joint commissions dead. If after these meetings there are things that should be followed up and things that should be implemented, the Joint Commission should be able to do that. I don't agree that every year we have to be jumping from pillar to post in order for us to know, for them to tell us what is under our ground, whether it is minerals, whether it is water, whether it is oil or whatever it may be. After all, we have spent so much money on having satellites in the sky, which I think it was propelled for us by China at one stage. Whether that one crashed, there was a second one. What have come of those satellites? What have we gained? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, sir. Professor Akinyemi, final word for you. I've taken us quite over time, but final word from you, sir.
Thank you. No, I have no objection. Maybe I didn't articulate my position quite well. I have no objection to us meeting these people. What I have an objection to is we being the travelers every year. What I would like to see is if we meet, okay, now we've got to Saudi Arabia this year. I hope that they will, that the AU next year would decide that in Kigali, we will meet with Saudi Arabia. If we meet with Japan this year, next year, Japan will meet us in Lagos or in Abuja. That's really what I have in mind. Let us rotate it so that way there is not this impression of being served with a summons and we go to the same place. I agree with everything else that you said about what do we gain from it. And that may be our fault. Again, as usual, that we come back, the Department of Information in the ministry, even if it's only to justify money spent, will release the communique that is agreed to there, and then we can pick on the takeaways that we can make use of. But at least in terms of good optics, it's not good for us to be the travelers every year. Let the others be the traveler as we rotate it.
Thank you very much, sir. On that note, I think a comment here, Ambassador Igali says, the problem is not in the summits, but in our capacity to follow up. We must have the institutional capacity for follow-up. Respectfully, most of these summits are alternating between African and the other sides, is his comment. On that note, we end the program. Next week, we'll be talking about, might refine the title a little bit, but the role of traditional rulers in foreign policy and in advancing foreign policy. We'll talk about that. I wish we could get some traditional rulers. Anybody knows any traditional rulers that we can bring to the program next week? Please let me know. That would be an interesting one.
We can bring the Sultan and Oni. They've been engaged in a lot of things.
Okay.
If you permit that, we invite, I'm sure the Sultan and Oni will be able to talk to us because they've been doing a lot of the traveling. Oni was in Brazil and he has been to several African countries. Same for Sultan.
Okay, let's do it, sir. If you can help us, I'm glad.
Yes, when I get a link, if His Excellency allows, I can send it to link to them and invite them to participate.
Please do. Please
do. Okay, there we have the Etsunupe, who is the president of the National Council of Traditional Rulers.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
But Ambassador Igali himself raised Ambassador Gubuzu, who is now traditional ruler, who has been involved. I think he's a major candidate to be invited.
I think it's about to say Ambassador Igali is a traditional ruler or something.
I was about to say that. I thought that was what you were saying. Okay. All right. Ambassador Igali, thank you very much for offering that. As soon as we get the link, I'll send it across. But maybe we can also still reach out to them ahead of time, just to let them know that the link is coming, and if they can make it, that would be good. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Professor Akinyemi. On that note, we end the program for tonight. See you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi.
Thank you. Good night, all.